We on? That's perfect. Did y'all get any rain last night? I didn't know if it was just west of town or if it was all over. My goodness. My goodness. Well, we're going to continue our study of the 23rd Psalm this morning. And I got to quit saying this because I said the same thing about last week's class, and maybe they're difficult because I make them difficult, which wouldn't surprise me. I think one of the things that makes this particular phrase in the 23rd Psalm challenging is that it means so many different things for so many different people. And I wanted to start the discussion with just that. When David writes, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, what do you think of when you read the valley of the shadow of death? What are we even talking about in that sense? One of the other, and I'll just go ahead and throw this out there because in this study I saw that in the footnotes it says one of the other renderings is the valley of deep darkness. And don't get me wrong, we're not going to change the psalm obviously, but one rendering could be the valley of deep darkness. And I think that bears saying or asking the question, does life have its peaks and valleys? Yes, absolutely. So when we think about the valley of deep darkness, what comes to mind? And it's interesting when I ask that question that nobody wants to speak up because I had to think about my own experience. And if somebody asked me that question, what do you think about when you think about the valley of deep darkness? It's hard to explain, honestly. And I think the second thing is we don't even really want to talk about it. And I touched on that a little bit when we talked about that He restores our soul, that we don't ever really want to talk about the valleys. Nobody ever makes a post about how they are facing the valley of deep darkness. The things that they're experiencing and going through and struggling with. It's just not something that we often talk about, but at the same time we realize that we all go through it. We all go through those valleys, and we all go through those times. And as I studied this a little bit, I really felt like the 88th Psalm, and I've said this before, that the Bible is its own best illustrator, that the 88th Psalm, in my mind, is a picture of the valley of deep darkness. And there wasn't any specific piece that I wanted just to touch on, so we're just going to read the whole thing. The 88th Psalm says, O Lord, the God of my salvation, I have cried out by day and in the night before you. Let my prayer come before you. Incline your ear to my cry, for my soul has had enough troubles, and my life has drawn near to Sheol. So I want to stop there and just throw that out there. Have you ever stopped to consider or stopped and had the thought, my life has had enough troubles? And I don't think there's anybody in the room that would say no. We've all been in that position. He says, I am reckoned among those who go down to the pit. I've become like a man without strength, forsaken among the dead, like the slain who lie in the grave, whom you remember no more, and they are cut off from your hand. You have put me in the lowest pit, in dark places, in the depths. Your wrath has rested upon me, and you've afflicted me with all your waves. You've removed my acquaintances far from me. You have made me an object of loathing to them. I'm shut up and cannot go out. My eye is wasted away because of affliction. I've called upon you every day, O Lord. I've spread out my hands to you. Will you perform wonders among the dead? Will the departed spirits rise and praise you? Will your loving kindness be declared in the grave, your faithfulness in Abaddon? Will your wonders be made known in the darkness, your righteousness in the land of forgetfulness? But I, O Lord, have cried out to you for help, and in the morning my prayer comes before you. O Lord, why do you reject my soul? Why do you hide your face from me? I was afflicted and about to die from my youth on. I suffer your terrors, I am overcome. Your burning anger has passed over me. Your terrors have destroyed me. You have surrounded me like water all day long. They have encompassed me altogether. You have removed lover and friend far from me. My acquaintances are in darkness. In my mind, and don't get me wrong, this is what makes this hard, is because it can mean a lot of different things to different people, but that is a word picture of the valley of deep darkness. When we're surrounded, when we're encompassed all together, when lover and friend are far from me, my acquaintances are in darkness. And I don't think there's anybody here that can't relate to that. But the thing about it is, and this is one of the questions that I considered, and I thought, the more I thought about it, the question is actually more difficult than I first considered, but is despair a sin? Is it wrong for us to despair? What's Joshua 1:9? We love to quote that one. What's Joshua 1:9 say? Remember that one? Do not tremble or be dismayed. Do not fear. Take courage. Let your heart take courage and do not fear. Like we read all of those kinds of passages. But then we have to stop and consider, is it a sin for us to be in despair? Well, let me ask it this way. Is it a weakness if we despair? David was in despair, which the 88th Psalm wasn't written by David, but we know that there was plenty of times that David was in despair. But the thing about it is, what we have to consider is, in those times of despair, what did David learn? To trust in God. What's the same thing that we learn in our time of despair? To trust in God. What are some of the things in life that cause despair? What are some of the things in life that cause us to travel through that valley of deep darkness? Death of a spouse, absolutely. What else? Sickness. Financial problems. Depression. And that's why when in all of those are definitely right answers, and that's why it was difficult in putting this lesson together. It's hard because there are experiences that you all have had with the valley of deep darkness that I can't relate to. But then at the same time, maybe there's things that I can talk about that you can't relate to. But we all go through those times.
Before the cross, Christ says, the soul's overwhelmed with sorrow.
Affirmative. And we're going to get to Jesus before it's all over today. One of the things that I think when we consider this idea, is it specific to the poor and destitute? No, absolutely not. I mean, there are plenty of people who have been successful, in quotes, only to realize that it wasn't what they had hoped that it would be. Only to realize that their success or their wealth or whatever else wasn't going to fulfill their desires. One of the things, and I thought about this example, and I don't want to, like I said, this doesn't encompass all that is the valley of deep darkness, but at the same time, I think it's worth considering and taking a look at in thinking about how sometimes we end up there. Because I thought about the brother of the prodigal son, the older brother, right? Younger brother, he gets his share. He goes off, squanders all of it. Well, what about the older brother? Could the older brother, when the younger brother came back, could he have allowed himself to fall into despair? Because now he thinks, well, I've wasted my life being here working for my dad. I mean, why didn't I go off and enjoy more things? Why have I wasted all of this time? Well, then at the same time, what if that turns into bitterness and depression? Because, I mean, he's wasted his whole life. He thought he was doing the right thing. But now he's just bitter at his dad and his brother, cynical about life. You think that's going to cause problems in his marriage? I can't imagine that it wouldn't. So then that causes problems in his marriage, and obviously now that he's always in a bad mood and he's always complaining about his wife, who's going to want to hang out with that guy? Nobody. Okay, so at that point now his friends abandon him. So we see how that starts to go off the edge there, doesn't it? Well, and he's obviously not going to go back to work for his dad. You kidding me? Forgive that guy for what he did to me? All the years that I wasted, and I never even got a goat to celebrate with my friends? Yeah, but then one day he realizes that he doesn't know how to do anything else except work for his dad. Where's he going to get another job? Now he's between jobs. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with being between jobs, but we all know people that have been between jobs for several years now. In that situation, every idea that he has fails. It falls through. It doesn't work. Everywhere he goes, he's rejected. There's nothing but rejection. And then eventually, he wakes up one morning with nothing to do and all day to do it. He has no ideas. No. Even if he had an idea, it wouldn't work. No purpose, no goals, not even the strength to set. What good would it do for me to set a goal? It ain't gonna work out. Not at this point. We've all, if we haven't been there, we've all seen people that have. How deep does that pit go? And it's funny because I can't help but think, being in a room with people who have seen more life than I have, I can't help but think that you also haven't peeked over that edge to see what's there at some point or other, in one way or another. And it's funny because we hear that example of the prodigal and how that could have gone. I mean, at this point, all his friends are gone. I mean, they don't want to loan him any more money than they already have. And I'm sure his wife is probably supporting him, but the funny thing about it is, he could very well be in a position where he's still got nice clothes. He's still living in the same house. His wife is supporting him. If you saw him on the street, you wouldn't know any different. If you saw him walking down the street, there's no way that you could tell how deep in the valley of darkness he was at that point. And it makes me think of, how do I view people in those situations? Have I considered the fact that they may very well be at that moment in the valley of darkness, deep darkness, in the pit that the psalmist talks about in other places? What is it that they're going through? And one of the things that makes it difficult, why wouldn't he just go home? Why at that point would he not just go back? There's lots of reasons. One of those reasons, and I want to touch on this, and I thought, again, there was another psalm that I felt like does a really good job of talking about a lot of these situations, and we're going to kind of use that as a framework this morning. But one of those things is, have you ever felt lost in life? Or maybe I should put it like this, since nobody's going to speak up, I can say, everybody that's never felt lost in life, raise your hand. Okay, so that's everybody. What is it that makes the wilderness so disorienting? Why is it disorienting? Why is life disorienting in and of itself? If you don't know where to go next, and I think the thing that you're touching on there, Butch, is the fact that there's too many options. In other words, there's no landmarks. If you're lost in the wilderness, there's an infinite number of directions that you could go. And if you go one way for just a little bit and you decide, well, this isn't the way, and then you change directions and you go there for a little bit and then you decide that isn't the way, what do you end up doing? We just end up doing this. Okay, but is that not the way that life seems at times? Just being overwhelmed by the number of decisions that we could or could not make, the number of directions that we could or could not go. What is it? Some of you guys that know the Bible better than I do, had the Israelites crossed the wilderness in a straight line, how long would it have taken them? Do you remember, Brian? Well, like a month or something. I mean, it wouldn't have took them 40 years. I mean, like if they would have gone in a straight line, they could have crossed the wilderness in like no time. Okay, so we all know that disorienting feeling of being lost. So look at the 107th Psalm. We're going to spend some time there this morning. Look at verse 4. Not to skip the first three, but for the sake of time, we're going to start in verse 4. It says, they wandered in the wilderness in a desert region. They did not find a way to an inhabited city. They were hungry and thirsty. Their soul fainted within them. Then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble. He delivered them out of their distresses. He led them also by a straight way to go to an inhabited city. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his loving kindness and for his wonders to the sons of men. For he has satisfied the thirsty soul, and the hungry soul he is filled with what is good. So there again, in that example, in the example of the prodigal, would he not have felt like in that situation that he was lost in the wilderness? With no place to go, and he's got all day to go there. But at the same time, the same is also true for us. Do we sometimes get lost in the wilderness? And as the psalmist says here, he says, then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble. In other words, there again, that is one of those situations that we find ourselves in, that we cry out to the Lord and he rescues us. But here's something else, and I mentioned this. I didn't mention it, but when I asked the question, why didn't he go home? And I said, there's lots of reasons. What if he was unwilling to let go of bitterness and resentment? What if that is what kept him from going back, from returning to the place that he could be safe and well-fed and all those other things. In the words of C.S. Lewis, the gates of hell are locked on the inside. Could that have been the thing that kept him from getting out, basically out of the darkness? Look at verse 10. He says, there were those who dwelt in, and here's the verbiage again, there were those who dwelt in darkness and in the shadow of death, prisoners in misery and chains, because they had rebelled against the words of God and spurned the counsel of the Most High. So when we read that passage and he says, because they had rebelled against the words of God and spurned the counsel of the Most High, is obedience what we do or what we do not do? And Brian is shaking his head yes, because the answer is yes. Yes, but at the same time, when Paul says in Ephesians to put away bitterness, wrath, anger, malice, when the Hebrew writer says in Hebrews 12, let us lay aside every encumbrance and the sin that so easily entangles. Why do we put those things off? What happens in our life when we allow ourselves to be entangled with bitterness and resentment and malice and revenge? Things get worse. That's right, Butch. They do. They do get worse. And I love the way in this psalm that it's described, because if we read on, it says, therefore he humbled their heart with labor. They stumbled and there was none to help. Then they cried out to the Lord in their trouble. He saved them out of their distresses. He brought them out of darkness and the shadow of death and broke their bands apart. Let them give thanks to the Lord for his loving kindness and for his wonders to the sons of men. And this is the kicker, for he has shattered the gates of bronze and cut bars of iron asunder. Did those things not feel like gates of bronze and bars of iron? An entanglement and a trap that we just cannot seem to break free from. And it's not just bitterness and resentment and malice, but there's so many other things that fall into that category that we become entangled in, that keeps us in the darkness. Go ahead. Whatever is not from faith is sin. 100%. So that's what makes it hard, I think, is because in our minds, we know the things that aren't from faith are sin. So we know when these types of things have taken control of us that it's sin. But the hard part is, how do we break free? And it's funny, too, because, Hendrix isn't in here this morning. We were talking about this morning about how there's so many things from the Holy Scripture that's so easy to understand and so difficult to do. But what does the psalmist say in verse 13? Then they cried out to the Lord. What is the thing that we have to understand about our own shortcomings, about our own bitterness and our own resentment and our own whatever else it is that we're carrying around? Can we overcome those things on our own? No. And that's so hard for us to accept because we want to say, oh no, I can deal with this. Right? I'm not one of those weak people that needs a bunch of help from somebody. No, I can get through this. I can overcome this. Okay, but then go ahead.